The Black Widow's dress stood stark against a misty highway, rain soaking to the thin fabric as Eleanor Matthews huddled by the roadside. Her golden brown hair hung in damp tangles across her pale face, the mourning veil long since abandoned miles back. Jack Wilson squinted through his windshield, the wipers beating a steady rhythm against the downpour as his red semi-truck slowed on the deserted road. Something about her posture, shoulders curved inward like a wounded bird, eyes fixed on the muddy ground, made Jack's chest tighten. He'd been driving for 15 years, knew all the warnings about picking up strangers. But the woman's trembling hands and the dignified way she stood despite her circumstances pulled at something deep inside him. Jack pulled over, tires skidding slightly on the wet shoulder. The woman didn't look up, didn't wave, didn't acknowledge him at all. He climbed down from his rig and approached slowly, palms open. "Ma'am, you all right out here?" he called gently. She flinched at his voice, finally raising her face. Jack's breath caught. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with hollow cheeks and eyes that held a particular emptiness he recognized from his own mirror after his wife passed. The look of someone who'd lost everything and wasn't sure they wanted what remained. "Need a ride somewhere?" Jack asked, already shrugging off his heavy jacket. She nodded once, a barely perceptible movement, her blue eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I'm Jack," he said, draping the coat over her shoulders. "Eleanor," she whispered, voice cracking like thin ice. "Eleanor Matthews." Jack helped Eleanor into the truck's cab, cranking the heater to full blast. She huddled against the passenger door, clutching his jacket around her thin frame. The black dress clung to her like a second skin, mud streaking its hem. A small gold locket hung around her neck, the only thing that seemed to have been protected from the elements, clutched periodically in her trembling hand. For miles, they drove in silence, windshield wipers keeping time with the rain. Jack didn't push her for answers. He'd seen enough in life to know that sometimes silence carried more weight than words. When Eleanor finally spoke, her voice was barely audible above the engine's rumble. "Thank you," she said, each syllable brittle. Most people wouldn't stop. Jack nodded. Most people haven't seen enough of life to know when someone really needs help. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the locket. "I've been walking since yesterday morning." Jack glanced at her mud-caked shoes. "That's a long time to be out in this weather." "I had to get away," she whispered. "I couldn't stay there anymore. Not after." Her voice trailed off, but Jack could fill in the blanks. The black dress, the haunted eyes, the absence of luggage or belongings. "You lost someone," he said gently. Not a question. Eleanor nodded, a single tear tracking down her cheek. "My husband, Thomas, 3 weeks ago." Jack tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I'm sorry. It was supposed to be our wedding day," she continued, words spilling out now like water through a broken dam. "Everything was perfect. The church, the flowers. I was in the dressing room when they told me there'd been an accident on the highway." Jack's stomach nodded. Highway accidents. He'd seen too many in his years on the road. "His family blamed me," Eleanor said, voice hollow. "So I brought bad luck, that if he hadn't been rushing to our wedding." She swallowed hard. "His mother called me a curse. Said no Matthews man had ever died so young before I came along." Jack shook his head, anger flaring on her behalf. "That's not right. Grief makes people cruel sometimes, but that's no excuse. They asked me to leave after the funeral. Said they couldn't bear to look at me." Eleanor's fingers twisted the fabric of Jack's jacket. "The whole town whispered when I walked by. 'Poor Thomas,' they'd say. 'Tied to that woman, and now look.'" Jack pulled into a small rest stop where a diner's lights glowed through the rain. He killed the engine and turned toward her. "Listen to me, Eleanor," he said, voice low but firm. "What happened to your husband was a tragedy, but it wasn't your fault, and you deserve better than to be treated that way." Eleanor stared at him, disbelief crossing her face. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Jack replied. "I know what it's like when people look at you differently after you lose someone. Like you're broken. Like you're nothing but your grief." He paused. "My wife, Sarah. Cancer. 5 years ago." Understanding flickered in Eleanor's eyes, the recognition that passes between people who walk similar dark paths. "How about some hot food?" Jack suggested gently. "My treat. Then we figure out your next step." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. As they walked toward the diner, Jack noticed how she straightened her shoulders despite the sodden dress and tangled hair. There was a dignity there, a quiet strength that grief hadn't quite extinguished. The diner fell silent when they entered. A young widow in a mud-stained black dress and a weather truck driver made quite the pair. Jack guided Eleanor to a booth by the window, ignoring the stares. He ordered 2 full breakfasts, extra coffee. "Where are you headed?" he asked after the waitress left. Eleanor stared at the laminated menu, fingers tracing its edges. "I don't know. Away. Somewhere nobody knows me as Poor Thomas's widow." Jack nodded. He understood the desire to outrun whispers. "I have a friend who runs a boarding house in Millerville," he offered. "About 3 hours from here. Small town, but good people. Might be a place to catch your breath." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. "Why would you help me like this?" Jack shrugged. "Someone helped me once when I needed it." The food arrived. Steaming plates of eggs, bacon, and pancakes. Eleanor ate slowly at first, then with increasing hunger, as though suddenly remembering her body's needs. Jack watched, relieved to see color gradually returning to her cheeks. 3 days later, Eleanor moved into Mrs. Porter's boarding house in Millerville. Jack had made the arrangements, paid for 2 weeks' lodging, and promised to check in when his route brought him through town. Eleanor had protested his generosity, but Jack waved away her concerns. "Just promise me one thing," he'd said. "Don't give up." The weeks that followed tested that promise severely. Eleanor found that being a young widow in a new town came with its own challenges. The curious glances, the awkward questions, the well-meaning but painful pity. She found work at the local pharmacy, stocking shelves and managing inventory. The pay was minimal, barely covering her room at Mrs. Porter's after the initial 2 weeks Jack had paid for. Some nights, she'd sit on her narrow bed, Thomas's locket clutched in her palm, wondering if she'd made a mistake in leaving. Mrs. Porter noticed her struggle. "Being a widow isn't disease, child," she said one evening, bringing Eleanor a cup of tea. "But people treat it like one because they're afraid. Afraid of what happened to you happening to them." Eleanor nodded, tears welling. "I feel like I'm nothing but the widow now. Like Eleanor disappeared the day Thomas died." "Then you need to find her again," Mrs. Porter said simply. When Jack's truck rolled through town a month later, he found Eleanor thinner, paler, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She tried to smile when he visited the pharmacy, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's not working, is it?" he asked gently as they walked to a nearby cafe after her shift. Eleanor shook her head. "I'm trying, Jack, but it's like I'm trapped in amber. Everyone sees the widow first and Eleanor second, if they see her at all." Jack nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe Millerville isn't the right place. Maybe nowhere is," Eleanor whispered. That night, disaster struck. A fire broke out in the boarding house kitchen. While everyone escaped safely, Eleanor lost what little she had, including Thomas's locket, which had been on her nightstand. She stood in the street, watching flames consume her temporary home, feeling as though the last physical connection to her past life was disappearing before her eyes. Mrs. Porter found her there at dawn, staring at the smoldering ruins. "Everything's gone," Eleanor said numbly. The older woman squeezed her shoulder. "Maybe that's not entirely a bad thing, dear. Sometimes we need to lose everything to find out what we're made of." The fire that destroyed Mrs. Porter's boarding house became Millerville's crisis, and unexpectedly, Eleanor's turning point. When a young boy suffered smoke inhalation trying to rescue his pet, Eleanor stepped forward without hesitation. "I'm a nurse," she said firmly, kneeling beside the frightened child. "Or I was before." The gathered crowd watched in amazement as her trembling hands steadied. Her voice grew confident, and she administered first aid with practiced precision until the ambulance arrived. The boy's mother clutched Eleanor's hands afterward, tears streaming down her face. "Thank God you were here," she whispered. Something shifted in Eleanor that morning. For the first time since Thomas's death, someone had seen her, not as a widow, but as a person with value, with skills, with something to offer. Dr. Miller, who ran the town clinic, approached her the next day. "Mrs. Matthews, I understand you have medical training." Eleanor nodded. "I was an ER nurse for 3 years before I married. We're desperately understaffed," he said simply. "Would you consider a position with us?" The clinic job changed everything. Eleanor moved into a small apartment above the pharmacy, her days now filled with purpose. She still wore her wedding ring, still felt the ache of Thomas's absence, but it no longer defined her every waking moment. When Jack's truck rolled through town 2 months later, he almost didn't recognize the woman who greeted him outside the clinic. Eleanor's hair was neatly styled, her clothes simple but professional. Most striking was a change in her eyes, still holding sadness, but now mingled with something else. Purpose, strength. "You look good, Eleanor," Jack said, genuine warmth in his voice. "I feel alive again," she admitted. "Not completely healed, but healing," Jack finished for her. "That's how it goes." Over dinner, Eleanor shared her new project, a support group for women who had lost spouses, inspired by her own experience. "I can't be the only widow who felt erased by her grief," she explained, a new passion animating her features. "If I can help even one woman feel less alone." Jack smiled, recognizing the transformation happening before his eyes. Eleanor was turning her pain into purpose, the surest path through grief he'd ever known. A year passed. Eleanor's support group grew from 3 hesitant participants to over 20 women from Millerville and surrounding towns. They met weekly in the church basement, sharing stories, resources, and most importantly, understanding. Eleanor no longer flinched at being called widow. She had reclaimed the word, transformed it from a label that diminished her to one that connected her to a community of strong women. Dr. Miller had promoted her to head nurse, her natural empathy and experience with grief making her especially effective with patients facing loss. The town that had once seen only her black dress now recognized her as a valued community member. When Jack's familiar red truck pulled into town for his bi-monthly visit, Eleanor was waiting with news. "I've been invited to speak at the regional medical conference," she told him over coffee, "about grief support in rural healthcare settings." Jack's face split into a proud grin. "Look at you, Eleanor Matthews, from standing in the rain to teaching doctors." Eleanor smiled, a full, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I wouldn't be here if you hadn't stopped that night, Jack." "You would have found your way," he insisted. "You're stronger than you know." The real surprise came 3 months later. Eleanor received a letter from Thomas's mother, the first contact since she'd been asked to leave after the funeral. "She heard about my work," Eleanor explained to Jack, hands trembling as she held the letter. "Thomas's cousin lost her husband in an accident. She joined a widow support group in her town, one I helped establish through my outreach program." The letter contained an apology, awkward and halting, but sincere. Thomas's mother acknowledged her cruelty, explaining but not excusing it through her overwhelming grief. "She wants to meet," Eleanor said softly, "to make amends." Jack watched emotions play across Eleanor's face, pain, uncertainty, and something like peace. "Will you go?" he asked gently. Eleanor nodded slowly. "I think Thomas would want that. And I need it too, not to forget, but to truly move forward." Jack reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "That's the bravest thing I've heard in a long time." Eleanor turned her palm up, squeezing his weathered hand. "I learned from the best." 2 years to the day since Jack had found Eleanor on that rainy highway, his red semi-truck pulled into Millerville. This time, the town square was decorated with balloons and a banner reading "Widow to Widow, 3 years of healing together." Eleanor stood on a small platform, addressing the gathered crowd. Women of all ages wearing purple ribbons, community members, healthcare professionals from 3 counties. Her golden brown hair was swept into an elegant knot, her blue eyes clear and confident. Jack watched from the back, chest swelling with pride. When she finished her speech to enthusiastic applause, their eyes met across the crowd. She smiled and made her way toward him. "You made it," she said, embracing him warmly. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," Jack replied, "though I hardly recognize the accomplished woman on that stage." Eleanor laughed softly. She was always there, just buried under grief. It took someone believing in her before she could believe in herself. As they walked together toward the celebration lunch, Eleanor slipped a small package into Jack's hand. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it." Inside was a keychain with a small silver truck and an inscription, "Sometimes angels drive 18-wheelers." Jack blinked rapidly against sudden moisture in his eyes. "You saved me that night," Eleanor said quietly. Jack shook his head. "No, Eleanor, you saved yourself. I just gave you a ride." She smiled, linking her arm through his. Sometimes that's all anyone needs, someone willing to stop and say, "Get in." If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever found unexpected strength during life's darkest moments, like Eleanor did? Or do you know someone who showed similar resilience and courage? Every share inspires others to see hope beyond loss. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of strong women rebuilding their lives against all odds.